Every day you face dozens of micro battles. The urge to respond angrily to criticism, the temptation to quit when things get difficult, the impulse to seek revenge when someone wrongs you, the desire to take shortcuts when no one is watching. These invisible battles determine your character more than any external conflict ever could. The modern warrior isn't someone who fights others. It's someone who has learned to fight wisely within themselves. The concept of the warrior has been corrupted in popular culture. We've reduced it to images of violence, aggression, and domination over others. But this represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what warrior traditions actually taught. The greatest military philosophers, from Sun Tzu to Miyamoto Musashi, understood that the supreme victory was achieved without fighting, that true strength was demonstrated through restraint rather than force, and that the most formidable opponent any person would ever face was their own undisciplined mind. The Stoic philosophers, many of whom were also military leaders, developed perhaps the most sophisticated understanding of warrior virtue that the world has ever seen. They recognized that external battles are temporary and circumstantial, but the battle for self-mastery is constant and universal. Every person, regardless of their profession or life circumstances, faces the same fundamental challenge. Will they be ruled by their impulses, emotions, and desires, or will they rule them? This internal warfare requires all the strategic thinking, discipline, courage, and perseverance of any external military campaign. The difference is that victory in this inner battle creates value rather than destroying it, builds character rather than breaking it, and serves the greater good, rather than merely advancing personal interests. The modern warrior fights against ignorance rather than people, against weakness rather than enemies, against chaos rather than opponents. But what does this actually look like in practice? How do you develop warrior virtues without warrior circumstances? How do you build the kind of character that ancient military traditions cultivated without the extreme challenges that traditionally forged such character? The answer lies in understanding that modern life provides all the raw material for warrior development. We've just lost the philosophical framework for recognizing and utilizing these opportunities. The traffic jam becomes a test of patience and emotional regulation. The difficult colleague becomes an opportunity to practice strategic thinking and interpersonal skill. The career setback becomes a chance to demonstrate resilience and adaptability. The social media outrage becomes a moment to choose wisdom over reactivity. Every ordinary day contains dozens of chances to practice the same virtues that warriors developed in extraordinary circumstances. The foundation of warrior philosophy isn't physical prowess but strategic thinking. Sun Tzu's art of war devotes more attention to intelligence gathering, planning, and psychological preparation than to actual combat techniques. The warrior mind is fundamentally a strategic mind, one that can see patterns, anticipate consequences, and choose actions based on long-term objectives rather than immediate impulses. In modern context, this strategic mindset becomes a powerful tool for navigating complexity without being overwhelmed by it. Consider the difference between someone who reacts emotionally to every challenge and someone who responds strategically. When faced with criticism, the reactive person immediately defends, counterattacks, or withdraws. The strategic person first seeks to understand the criticism, evaluates its validity, considers the motives of the critic, and then chooses a response that serves their long-term interests and values. This isn't about being calculating or manipulative. It's about being thoughtful rather than impulsive. The warrior mind doesn't act immediately on every feeling or urge, but creates space between stimulus and response where wisdom can operate. This space is the battlefield where character is won or lost, where growth occurs or stagnation sets in, where you either become more of who you want to be or more of who your worst impulses would make you. The ancient concept of know your enemy applies directly to self-mastery. Your primary adversaries aren't other people, but your own tendencies toward laziness, anger, fear, envy, and self-deception. The warrior studies these internal enemies with the same careful attention that a military strategist studies opposing forces. What triggers your anger? Under what circumstances do you become lazy? What fears hold you back from necessary action? What forms does your self-deception typically take? This reconnaissance of your own psychological terrain requires the same discipline and honesty that military intelligence requires. You can't defend against weaknesses you don't acknowledge or prepare for challenges you refuse to see coming. The warrior mind maintains constant vigilance not against external threats, but against internal vulnerabilities that could compromise your ability to act with integrity and effectiveness. James Chen, a project manager I know, exemplifies this strategic approach beautifully. When his team faces tight deadlines and high stress, he doesn't just react to immediate problems as they arise. He anticipates where tensions will likely emerge, prepares responses to common setbacks, and maintains awareness of his own stress responses so he can manage them before they affect his decision-making. He's fighting the battle for project success primarily by fighting the battle for his own mental clarity and emotional regulation. But strategic thinking alone isn't enough. The warrior tradition also emphasizes what we might call tactical virtue, the moment-by-moment choices that either build or erode character. Every small decision becomes a training opportunity. Every minor challenge becomes a chance to practice the virtues that will be essential when larger challenges arise. The person who can't control their response to a slow internet connection is unlikely to maintain composure during a genuine crisis. This is why warrior traditions emphasize discipline in small things as preparation for discipline in large things. The soldier who couldn't keep their equipment clean and organized couldn't be trusted with complex military operations. The modern equivalent might be the person who can't maintain basic routines, manage their time effectively, or keep their commitments to themselves. How can they be trusted with significant responsibilities or challenging goals? Traditional warrior culture was built around physical courage, the willingness to face danger and death for a cause greater than oneself. But the Stoics recognized that moral courage was actually more difficult and more important than physical courage. It takes more strength to admit you're wrong than to defend a position you know is false. It takes more bravery to change a harmful habit than to continue comfortable self-destruction. It takes more valor to speak truth to power than to go along with popular delusions. The modern battlefield for courage isn't geographic but psychological and moral. Every day presents opportunities to practice the kind of bravery that builds character rather than destroys enemies. The courage to have difficult conversations instead of avoiding conflict. The courage to pursue meaningful work instead of settling for what's safe and comfortable. The courage to maintain your principles when it would be easier to compromise them for social acceptance or material gain. But here's what's fascinating about moral courage. It operates on exactly the same principles as physical courage. Both require the ability to act appropriately despite fear, to choose what's right over what's easy, and to accept risk in service of something more important than immediate comfort or safety. The only difference is that moral courage faces internal rather than external dangers. Consider the entrepreneur who knows her business model isn't sustainable but fears the short-term costs of changing it. The moral courage to restructure the business, possibly laying off employees and taking financial losses, requires the same psychological qualities that a soldier needs to advance under enemy fire. Both situations demand action despite fear, commitment despite uncertainty, and willingness to sacrifice immediate comfort for long-term benefit. Or think about someone like Dr. Rachel Torres, a physician who noticed systematic problems in her hospital's treatment protocols. Speaking up meant risking professional relationships, potential retaliation from administration, and the discomfort of challenging respected colleagues. But staying silent meant allowing preventable patient harm to continue. Her decision to raise these concerns required genuine moral courage, the kind that puts principles above personal convenience. This form of courage is actually more demanding than physical bravery because it lacks the external validation and social recognition that often accompanies military courage. Moral courage frequently requires you to stand alone, to be misunderstood, and to accept that you may never receive credit for doing the right thing. It's the courage of integrity rather than heroism, of character rather than reputation. The Stoic warrior develops this courage through what we might call progressive exposure therapy. Just as physical courage is built by gradually facing greater challenges, moral courage is built by consistently choosing the harder right over the easier wrong in small situations. The person who can't tell a minor truth because it might create awkwardness is unlikely to tell a major truth when it really matters. This practice requires what Marcus Aurelius called the discipline of action, choosing behavior based on principle rather than preference, on long-term wisdom rather than short-term comfort. Every time you choose to do something you know is right, despite not wanting to do it, you strengthen the psychological muscles that enable principled action under pressure. But moral courage also requires strategic wisdom. The warrior doesn't just charge blindly into every moral battle, but chooses engagements carefully, considering when speaking up will create positive change versus when it will merely create conflict without benefit. This discernment between necessary moral stands and unnecessary moral posturing is itself a form of warrior wisdom. The key insight is that courage isn't the absence of fear, but right action in the presence of fear. Whether you're facing physical danger or moral complexity, the underlying capacity is the same. The ability to do what needs to be done, regardless of how you feel about doing it. This capacity can be developed through daily practice in situations that require smaller forms of courage, building toward the ability to act with integrity when the stakes are highest. Perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of warrior philosophy is understanding when not to fight. The untrained fighter strikes whenever provoked. The master fighter strikes only when necessary. This principle of noble restraint represents the highest development of warrior virtue, requiring more strength and wisdom than any aggressive action ever could. In modern life, we're constantly provoked to unnecessary battles. Social media algorithms are designed to trigger outrage and engagement. Political discourse encourages tribal warfare over productive dialogue. Consumer culture promotes competitive acquisition and status struggles. The news cycle creates artificial urgency around issues we can't directly influence. The untrained mind takes the bait every time, exhausting itself in conflicts that serve no constructive purpose. The warrior mind recognizes these provocations for what they are: invitations to waste energy on battles that can't be won and don't need to be fought. Instead of automatically engaging with every stimulus that demands a response, the disciplined person asks, "Is this battle necessary? Will engaging here serve my principles or just feed my ego? Will this conflict create value or just consume energy?" This discernment requires what the Stoics called the discipline of desire, the ability to want what's actually worth wanting rather than whatever seems urgent or exciting in the moment. Many battles feel important because they trigger our emotions, but feeling strongly about something doesn't make it strategically significant. The ability to distinguish between what feels important and what actually is important might be the most crucial skill for modern life. Consider how this applies to online discourse. Someone posts something you disagree with strongly. Your immediate impulse might be to correct them, to defend your position, to engage in debate. But the warrior mind asks deeper questions. Will this person actually change their mind based on my comment? Will this discussion lead to mutual understanding or just mutual frustration? Is this the most productive use of my limited time and energy? Most of the time, the honest answer is that online arguments serve neither truth nor relationship, but only the ego's need to be right and be seen being right. The restraint to scroll past without engaging isn't avoidance, it's strategic wisdom. You're conserving your energy for battles that actually matter, for conversations that might actually create positive change. This principle extends to every area of life. The colleague who tries to provoke you with sarcastic comments. The family member who always brings up topics designed to start arguments. The neighbor who plays music too loudly. The driver who cuts you off in traffic. Each situation presents a choice. Will you take the bait and engage in conflict that serves no one? Or will you practice the restraint that preserves your energy for what actually matters? But restraint without purpose becomes mere passivity. The warrior's restraint is strategic, based on clear understanding of worthy objectives and efficient allocation of resources toward achieving them. You don't avoid all conflict. You choose your conflicts based on principle rather than impulse, on long-term benefit rather than short-term satisfaction. This is beautifully illustrated by someone like Marcus Aurelius, a team leader who frequently deals with interpersonal drama among his colleagues. His first instinct might be to mediate every dispute, correct every misunderstanding, and ensure everyone gets along perfectly. But experience has taught him to distinguish between conflicts that need his intervention and conflicts that people need to work out themselves. His restraint isn't indifference, it's strategic delegation of responsibility that helps his team members develop their own conflict resolution skills. The art of noble restraint also applies to internal battles. Not every thought deserves attention. Not every emotion requires immediate action, and not every impulse needs to be followed. The disciplined mind learns to observe its own activity with the same strategic discernment it applies to external challenges. Is this worry productive or just habitual? Is this anger justified or just triggered? Is this desire aligned with my values or just convenient rationalization? One of the most counterintuitive aspects of warrior philosophy is the relationship between discipline and freedom. From the outside, disciplined behavior looks like self-imposed restriction and limitation. But from the inside, discipline creates the only genuine freedom possible. The freedom to act according to your highest values rather than being controlled by your lowest impulses. The undisciplined person thinks they're free because they do whatever they feel like doing in the moment. But this apparent freedom is actually a form of slavery to circumstances, emotions, and immediate desires. When you must check your phone every time it buzzes, when you can't resist unhealthy food when you're stressed, when you automatically react with anger whenever someone criticizes you, you're not free. You're predictably controlled by external stimuli and internal impulses. The disciplined person appears constrained because they don't always do what they feel like doing. But this apparent constraint creates real freedom. The freedom to pursue long-term goals despite short-term discomfort. The freedom to maintain relationships despite temporary conflicts. The freedom to build the life you actually want, rather than just reacting to whatever life presents. This paradox operates in every area of development. The musician who practices scales religiously gains the freedom to play complex pieces that the undisciplined musician can never attempt. The athlete who follows a strict training regimen gains the freedom to perform at levels that the casual exerciser can never reach. The scholar who maintains consistent study habits gains the freedom to engage with ideas that remain inaccessible to the intellectually undisciplined. In moral and psychological development, discipline works the same way. The person who has trained themselves to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively gains the freedom to navigate difficult situations without being controlled by them. The person who has developed emotional regulation gains the freedom to maintain their values under pressure. The person who has built strong habits gains the freedom to focus their willpower on challenges that actually require it. But here's what makes this particularly relevant for modern life. Discipline is a transferable skill. The person who develops discipline in one area finds it easier to develop discipline in other areas. Physical fitness training builds mental resilience. Intellectual rigor strengthens emotional self-control. Artistic practice develops the patience and persistence needed for any complex undertaking. This is why warrior traditions emphasized physical training not just for its own sake, but as preparation for mental and moral challenges. The soldier who could endure physical discomfort without complaint was more likely to maintain composure under psychological pressure. The martial artist who could practice the same technique thousands of times was developing the persistence needed for any form of mastery. The modern warrior can use the same principle by choosing specific areas for disciplinary development that build transferable capacity. It might be maintaining a consistent exercise routine, learning a musical instrument, studying a foreign language, or practicing meditation. The specific discipline matters less than the consistency and the intention to use it as training for broader self-mastery. Lisa Park, a graphic designer I encountered, discovered this principle accidentally. She started running every morning not because she particularly enjoyed running, but because she wanted to lose weight. After 6 months of consistent early morning runs, she noticed that her work productivity had improved dramatically. She was handling client conflicts more skillfully, and she was making better financial decisions. The discipline she developed through running had strengthened her capacity for discipline in every other area of her life. This transfer effect explains why military training has historically been valued far beyond its immediate practical applications. The habits of mind developed through military discipline, attention to detail, persistence under pressure, and subordination of personal comfort to larger objectives serve people well in any civilian career that requires sustained effort and consistent performance. The key insight is that discipline isn't about self-punishment or rigid control. It's about developing the capacity to choose your actions based on your long-term values rather than your immediate feelings. This capacity is built through practice, starting with small commitments that you can realistically maintain and gradually expanding to larger challenges as your disciplinary strength grows. Every time you do something you committed to doing despite not feeling like doing it, you strengthen the psychological foundation that makes all other achievements possible. The ultimate expression of warrior virtue isn't personal achievement, but service to something greater than oneself. This principle distinguishes the warrior from the mere fighter, the protector from the aggressor, the guardian from the conqueror. The true warrior's strength is directed outward toward protecting and serving others, not inward toward self-aggrandizement or domination. In modern context, this service orientation transforms every professional and personal role into an opportunity for warrior virtue. The teacher who maintains high standards despite administrative pressure is serving future generations. The entrepreneur who refuses to compromise product quality for short-term profits is serving customers and employees. The parent who models integrity despite personal cost is serving their children's character development. The citizen who speaks truth about uncomfortable realities is serving democratic discourse. This service imperative provides both motivation and guidance for warrior development. When your discipline and courage serve purposes larger than personal advancement, they become sustainable in ways that purely self-interested motivation never can. The person who exercises only for personal appearance may struggle with consistency, but the person who exercises to model healthy habits for their children or to maintain energy for professional service often finds deeper reserves of motivation. Service also provides a crucial check against the potential corruption of warrior virtues. Courage without service can become reckless aggression. Discipline without service can become rigid control. Strategic thinking without service can become manipulation. But when these qualities are consistently directed toward protecting and benefiting others, they retain their nobility and continue developing in positive directions. The Stoic concept of sympathia describes the fundamental interconnectedness of all rational beings. What affects one person ultimately affects everyone. What serves the common good ultimately serves individual flourishing. This understanding transforms warrior development from a solitary pursuit into a collaborative endeavor. You develop strength not just for yourself, but for everyone who depends on you, everyone you influence, and everyone who benefits from living in a world with more rather than fewer people of character. This service orientation also provides clarity about which battles are worth fighting. The conflicts that serve only ego, pride, or personal advantage become obviously unworthy of warrior virtue. The challenges that protect others, advance justice, or contribute to human flourishing become obviously worthy of whatever sacrifice they require. The question, who does this serve, becomes a reliable guide for allocating energy and choosing engagements. Consider someone like Michael Thompson, a mid-level manager who discovered that his company was systematically underpaying female employees. His personal career would be safer if he stayed quiet, but his sense of service to justice and to his female colleagues motivated him to document the disparities and present them to senior leadership. His warrior virtues of courage, strategic thinking, and discipline were all directed toward serving others rather than advancing himself. But service doesn't require grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices. Most warrior service happens through excellence in ordinary responsibilities. The nurse who provides compassionate care during a difficult shift. The teacher who stays late to help struggling students. The manager who takes responsibility for team failures and shares credit for team successes. The friend who shows up consistently during others' difficult periods. These daily acts of service are where warrior character is actually built and expressed. The service imperative also extends to cultural and generational responsibility. The modern warrior serves not just immediate relationships, but future generations by modeling what principled living looks like, by contributing to institutions and traditions that support human flourishing, and by refusing to participate in cultural degradation even when such participation would be personally advantageous. This long-term service perspective helps maintain warrior virtues during periods when their immediate benefits aren't obvious. The person who maintains integrity during corrupt times may not see immediate rewards, but they're serving the possibility of future restoration. The person who develops discipline during prosperous times is preparing to serve during inevitable, challenging periods. The person who practices courage during peaceful times is building capacity for service when genuine threats emerge. Becoming a modern-day warrior without fighting battles requires consistent daily practice of the same virtues that ancient warriors developed through extreme circumstances. The difference is that you must create your own training ground from ordinary life situations rather than waiting for extraordinary challenges to develop these capacities. The morning routine becomes your first training exercise. Can you do what you plan to do despite how you feel? Can you maintain your commitments to yourself when no one else is watching? The quality of your morning discipline sets the tone for how you'll handle larger challenges throughout the day. Every interaction with other people becomes an opportunity to practice strategic thinking, emotional regulation, and service orientation. The difficult conversation with your supervisor becomes training in moral courage. The conflict with your spouse becomes practice in principled compromise. The frustration with slow service becomes an exercise in patience and perspective. The key is approaching these ordinary situations with the same intentionality that a warrior brings to training. Instead of just reacting to whatever happens, you consciously use each challenge as raw material for character development. What virtue does this situation call for? How can I respond in a way that builds rather than depletes my capacity for future challenges? But warrior development also requires what we might call progressive challenge seeking. Just as physical fitness requires gradually increasing demands, psychological and moral fitness requires gradually taking on greater responsibilities and more difficult situations. The person who never volunteers for challenging projects, never speaks up about important issues, and never takes risks for principled reasons won't develop warrior character through ordinary life alone. This doesn't mean seeking conflict or creating unnecessary difficulties. It means accepting appropriate challenges when they arise and occasionally choosing growth over comfort when meaningful opportunities present themselves. The goal is to build capacity gradually rather than waiting until a crisis forces rapid development under less favorable circumstances. The evening review becomes crucial for warrior development. What situations tested your warrior virtues today? Where did you respond with wisdom and where did you react from impulse? What can you learn from both your successes and your mistakes? This daily self-examination prevents you from simply repeating patterns without conscious improvement. The ultimate test of modern warrior development isn't whether you can handle dramatic crises, though that capacity will emerge naturally from consistent practice. The test is whether you can maintain your principles during ordinary pressures, whether you can serve others while advancing your own legitimate interests, and whether you can build rather than destroy through your daily choices. The world doesn't need more people who can win fights. It needs more people who can prevent fights through wisdom, resolve conflicts through skill, and protect what matters through principled action. The modern warrior serves by becoming someone others can depend on, someone who makes situations better rather than worse, someone who contributes to human flourishing rather than human suffering. This kind of warrior strength is available to anyone willing to do the daily work of character development. It doesn't require special circumstances, exceptional talents, or dramatic sacrifices. It requires the decision to treat every day as training for the person you want to become, and every challenge as an opportunity to practice the virtues that make life worth living. The battles that matter most are fought in moments when no one is watching, when the choice is between easy and right, when you must decide whether to be ruled by your highest aspirations or your lowest impulses. Win these invisible battles consistently, and you become the kind of person the world desperately needs. A warrior whose strength serves life rather than destroying it. If you found value in exploring how ancient warrior wisdom applies to modern challenges. Subscribe for more insights on developing strength through service rather than conflict. Remember, the ultimate victory isn't defeating others, but becoming someone worthy of the trust others place in you.